son bought a house and I found out from a neighbor, not from my son, not from my daughter-in-law. From a woman named Carol who lives 2 streets over from me, who ran into me at the Kroger and said, "Oh, I heard Nathan and Diane closed on that place in Ridgemont Hills. Good for them." And she smiled like she was giving me good news. I stood there in the cereal aisle holding a box of oatmeal and I smiled back. I said, yes, real exciting. And then I walked to my truck and sat in the parking lot for about 15 minutes before I could make myself drive home. My son had bought a house, and he hadn't told me. Now I want to be fair here. I want to tell this the way it actually happened, not the way I wished it happened, and not the way I was tempted to tell it in the weeks after when I was angry, and everything looked different. So let me back up. Let me tell you who I am first, and then you'll understand why that parking lot felt the way it did. My name is Howard. I'm 63 years old. I've been in commercial plumbing for 38 years. I know that doesn't sound glamorous. It isn't. I've spent more of my life under buildings than above them, working in crawl spaces and mechanical rooms, getting up at 5 in the morning to fix burst pipes in restaurants before the breakfast rush. I don't have a college degree. I got my journeyman's license at 22 and my master plumber's license at 27. And I built a small contracting business by the time I was 35. Nothing huge. 4 trucks, 6 guys, steady commercial accounts, hospitals, school districts, municipal buildings. Honest work. My wife passed away 11 years ago. Breast cancer caught late went fast. That's its own story and not one I can tell right now without losing the thread. What matters is that after she was gone, it was just me and my son Nathan, who was 22 at the time and in his 2nd year of a nursing program at the community college. We got through it the way men like us get through things, by not talking about it much and by staying busy. Nathan finished his program, got his RN, went back for his BSN a few years later while he was working. I was proud. I told him I was proud. That's not something I had any trouble saying. He met Diane about 6 years ago at the hospital where he worked. She was in hospital administration, smart, put together, always dressed like she had somewhere important to be. When he brought her home the first time, she looked around my house, my clean, modest, paid-off house, and said, "It's cozy." The way she said it, I knew what she meant. But Nathan looked happy. So I let it go. They got married 4 years ago. I gave them $20,000 as a wedding gift. Money I'd saved, money from years of early mornings and crawl spaces and summer heat and paperwork I did myself because I couldn't afford an accountant for the first decade. I didn't announce it at the reception. I put it in an envelope and gave it to Nathan the morning of the wedding and told him it was to start their life right. He hugged me. That's the last time I remember him hugging me without it feeling like he was in a hurry to let go. The first 2 years were fine. We had Sunday dinners, maybe once or twice a month. I'd bring something, a pie from the bakery on Clement Street, or a bag of groceries, because I never liked to show up empty-handed. Diane was polite. She called me Howard, never Dad, but I didn't push it. Nathan seemed happy, and his happiness was what I was watching. Then Nathan got his nurse practitioner certification and took a position at a specialty clinic cardiology. More money, better hours. And something shifted in the house that I couldn't quite name at first. The Sunday dinner started spacing out. Once a month, then every 6 weeks, then we've been so busy, Dad, things are crazy right now. I understood. I told myself I understood. I kept sending the occasional Venmo when I heard things were tight, 500 here, 800 there. Nothing said about it. No expectation. That's just what you do when you can. What I didn't know, what I only pieced together later, was that during this same time, Diane had started pulling Nathan toward a different version of his life. New friends. Couples from the hospital's executive team and the medical group's administrative side. People who vacationed in places that required passports. People who talked about school districts and property values and the right zip code the way I talk about pipe fittings, constantly, fluently, like it was the only language worth speaking. I'm not saying those things are bad. I'm saying I started to notice that when Nathan talked about his life, I appeared in it less and less. I found out about the house in October. They had closed in September. Ridgemont Hills is a newer development on the east side of the county, the kind of subdivision where every house looks like it was designed to photograph well, but not necessarily to last. The listing price on homes over there runs between $480 and $550. That's not money I have sitting around, but I know what that kind of purchase requires. And I knew Nathan's savings situation well enough to know that a down payment on a place like that would have stretched him. I didn't call him right away after the Kroger parking lot. I went home and sat with it. I thought about whether there was a version of this that made sense. A version where your son buys a house and doesn't tell you, and there's a reasonable explanation. I tried to build that version. I couldn't make it stand. I called him 2 days later. Kept it casual. Asked how things were going. Asked about work. And then I said, "Hey, I heard through the grapevine that you and Diane bought a place over in Ridgemont Hills. Congratulations." There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, we closed last month. It's been hectic, Dad. We've just been trying to get settled." I said, "Of course. I'd love to see it sometime." He said, "Absolutely. We'll have you over once we get some furniture in." That was in October. He didn't have me over in October. Or November. In December, I got a group text. It was from Diane's number. It said, "Howard, we're hosting a housewarming on the 14th, 7 p.m. Cocktail Attire. Hope you can make it. Cocktail Attire." I looked at that text for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt. It wasn't just the clothes thing, though I'll admit that landed. It was the group text, the Howard, the 7 words, and then "hope you can make it," like I was a neighbor they were being polite to. I've been to 3 of my son's birthdays where I drove 4 hours each way. I was in the waiting room when he had his appendix out. I taught him to drive in the parking lot of a church on a Sunday morning because his mother was too nervous to do it and thought I was steadier. And I was getting a group text. I went. I want you to know I went. I bought a sport coat I didn't need, and I pressed my best slacks, and I showed up at 7:15 with a bottle of Woodford Reserve because I didn't know what wine to bring, and I know bourbon. The house was beautiful. I'll give him that. High ceilings, new everything, an island in the kitchen the size of my dining room table. There were maybe 40 people there. I recognized almost none of them. The ones I met were doctors, administrators, a couple of finance people. They were perfectly polite in the way that people are polite when they're not sure what to do with you. I found Nathan in the kitchen. He hugged me quick and said, "Dad, glad you made it. Let me introduce you to some people." And he introduced me to a man named Brad and a woman named Kessler something, and then someone called him away, and Brad and the Kessler woman went back to their conversation, and I stood there holding my bourbon glass. I stayed 2 hours. I talked to a few people. I looked at the house. I looked at my son across the room laughing with a group of people who all looked comfortable in ways I couldn't quite touch. And I drove home. I thought that was the thing. I thought I'd been hurt and I'd swallowed it and we'd go on. But in February, Nathan called me. He was stressed. I could hear it before he said a word. He said the mortgage was more than they planned for. Diane had taken on some credit card debt furnishing the house, and they were short going into spring. He asked if I could loan them $15,000. I had the money. That's the honest answer. I had it, and he knew I had it. I've been careful my whole life, no debt except my business line of credit, house paid off, retirement account steady. I was the person he called because he knew I could say yes. I told him I needed a couple of days to look at my accounts. I want to tell you what happened in those couple of days. I sat with something I've been not quite looking at for a long time. I pulled up my phone and I looked at the group text from December. I thought about the Kroger parking lot. I thought about Sunday dinners that stopped happening. I thought about what it feels like to be in a room of 40 people at your son's house and not know a single one of them, and to realize that was intentional, not malicious necessarily, but intentional. And I thought about something my father told me once. He said, "Howard, love doesn't mean you have to keep renting yourself out to people who've stopped paying attention to you." I called Nathan back on Thursday. I told him I was sorry, but I wasn't going to be able to loan him the money. I told him I'd had some unexpected business expenses, which was true. One of my trucks needed a transmission, and that I couldn't move that kind of cash right now. I told him I was sorry. I kept my voice even. I meant the apology too, because I don't think loaning money should feel like punishment, and I didn't want it to. But I also knew that if I said yes, nothing would change. He'd take the money, things would smooth over, and I'd still be getting group texts. He said he understood. He sounded disappointed but not surprised. We hung up. What happened next is the part that changed things. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Diane. Not a text, an actual phone call, which alone told me something had shifted. She said she wanted to talk. She said Nathan didn't know she was calling. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I said yes. We met at a Panera near her office on a Wednesday morning. She was already there when I arrived, and she looked less put together than usual, not disheveled, but human. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and she said, "I owe you an apology." I sat down. I listened. She told me that she'd been embarrassed. That was the word she used. Embarrassed of the gap between where they were trying to be and where they'd come from. That she'd convinced herself that having people see a different version of their life was the same as building a different life. She said she'd told Nathan not to tell me about the house because she wanted to announce it a certain way at a certain time. And then time passed, and it became something she didn't know how to undo. She said, "I think I've been making Nathan choose without ever saying that's what I was doing, and I think he's been choosing me, and I don't think he realizes what that cost him." I didn't say anything for a minute. Then I said, "Diane, I'm not angry at you. I want you to know that, but I need Nathan to know that I'm not an ATM. I'm his father, and those are different things." She nodded. She didn't cry, but she looked like she'd been crying earlier. She said, I know that now." That night, Nathan called me. He said Diane had told him about the coffee. He said he was sorry. He said it like he meant it. Not rushed, not performed, but slow and careful. The way you talk when you're saying something true that costs you something to say. He said, "Dad, I think I got so focused on where we were going that I stopped looking at what I was leaving behind, and I left you behind. I did that." I told him I heard him. We talked for an hour and a half that night, longer than we'd talked in 2 years. He told me about the stress of the new position, about Diane's family's expectations, about feeling like he'd been running towards something and not stopping to check what he was running from. I told him about my father. I told him some things about his mother that I'd never said out loud. It felt like finding something you'd given up looking for. We didn't fix everything that night. You don't fix 2 years in a phone call. But something opened up that had been closed, and I think we both felt it. I'm going to tell you what I learned, because I think it's the part that matters. I spent a lot of years believing that showing up with money or groceries or your time was the same as being present. And maybe it is for a while. But I think there comes a point where you have to ask yourself what you're actually funding. If what you're funding is a version of your kid's life that doesn't include you, then you're not helping them grow. You're paying for your own disappearance. That's not love, that's fear. Fear of losing them if you stop. My father taught me to be a plumber. He taught me that if you want to know whether a system is working, you stop adding to it and see what happens. The pressure drops, and then you know exactly where the leak is. I stopped adding, and I found out a lot of things I needed to know. Nathan and Diane had me over for Easter. It was just the 3 of us. Diane cooked, which I didn't expect, and she asked me to show her how to make the biscuits his mother used to make, and we stood in her expensive kitchen and I walked her through it. Baking powder, not baking soda. Cold butter, not melted. Don't overwork the dough. Nathan set the table. He put out the good plates. When we sat down, he looked at me across the table and he said, "I'm glad you're here, Dad." And I believed him. That's worth more than $15,000. It's worth more than all of it. But I'll be honest with you, the $15,000, I don't plan to bring it up again. It's not a card I'm holding over anyone. I made my decision and they'll make theirs going forward, and we'll see what kind of people we all are when the pressure drops. So far, I like what I'm seeing. I'm not a man who needs a lot, never have been. I need my work to be honest. I need my truck to start, and I need my son to know I exist as something other than a resource. We're working on the last one. That's enough for now. If you're in a situation like mine, if you're the parent who gives and has started to wonder whether your kid would notice if you just stopped, I want to say this gently. You're allowed to find out. You're allowed to stop being an ATM and see what's left when the screen goes dark. What comes back to you tells you everything, and what doesn't come back tells you that too. I sat in a Kroger parking lot in October and felt like I was invisible. In April, my son set the table with the good plates. That's a long way to travel in 6 months. But we got there. I've been thinking about what I would tell a younger version of myself. Not the 22-year-old with a journeyman's license and nothing to prove. I mean the 55-year-old me. The one who is already slipping into the habit of funding everything and questioning nothing. I'd tell him this. The way you give matters as much as what you give, and if you give in a way that asks for nothing in return, not even acknowledgement, not even a phone call, you're not being generous. You're teaching people that you don't require anything, and people learn that lesson fast. I don't say that bitterly. I say it because it's true, and because I think a lot of people in my position, parents who worked hard, who didn't have the degrees or the titles, who made up for it by being steady and available and financially reliable. A lot of us fall into the same pattern. We stop asking to be seen because we don't want to be a burden. And then one day we're standing in a cereal aisle finding out our son bought a house, and we smile and say, yes, real exciting, because we've had so much practice at not making it about ourselves. That's not strength. That's erosion. There's a difference. What I understand now, looking back at what happened with Nathan and Diane, is that every situation has a weight to it. The things you do, the choices you make, the way you treat the people who showed up for you, all of it accumulates. It doesn't vanish just because no one's keeping score out loud. Nathan is a smart man and a good man at his core, and I think part of him knew, even in the middle of it, that something was off. That's why Diane's call came before his. She saw it first because she was the one who'd engineered the distance, and she understood what had actually been built and what it was sitting on. Integrity is like that. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself, but it holds weight, and over time, the people around you can feel whether it's there or not. Nathan felt it when the money stopped, not because I punished him. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't punishing anyone, but because absence has a way of clarifying things that presence can sometimes obscure. When I stepped back, he could finally see the shape of what I'd been. And what I'd been was his father. Not his bank, not his safety net. His father, who drove 4 hours for his birthdays, who taught him to drive in a church parking lot on a Sunday morning, who put $20,000 in an envelope the morning of his wedding without making a speech about it. That man had been right there the whole time. He just got easy to overlook when the money kept coming regardless. What Nathan showed me at Easter, when he set the table with the good plates and said, "I'm glad you're here, Dad," and meant it, that came from him choosing to be better. That took something. It took honesty, and honesty costs people something real. I respect him more for it than I would have if he'd just written me a check or shown up at my door with flowers. Those things are easy. Looking your father in the eye and saying, "I left you behind," that requires the kind of courage that can't be bought or borrowed. I'm 63 years old and I'm still learning. I think that's the point. You don't arrive somewhere and stop. You keep going, and the people worth keeping in your life keep going with you. Nathan and I are still finding our way back to each other, and it's slow and it's real, and that slowness is what makes me trust it. That's enough for me. That's more than enough.